Hey guys, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play. I'm here with another setup and rules video, this time for Cloudspire. Oh, it's heavy. Here it is. So if you don't know what Cloudspire is, it is the third game from Chip Theory Games. It's designed by Josh Carlson, Adam Carlson, and Josh Wielgus. It is a tower defense, wave defense game. It is for 1 to 4 players. It's got a solo mode, it's got a cooperative mode, it's got a team mode, it's got a full competitive mode as well. It says on the box here that it takes 90 minutes to 2 hours to play, but I think that if you know the game really well, maybe you can do it in that time, but more than likely you're looking at a 3-hour affair, even with 2 players. So Cloudspire is this floating island, and it's covered with this magical resource called Source. And everybody wants Source, and they all want it for different reasons. So the magical floating island is called Ankara, and 4 races have shown up to fight over the Source. You've got the Avian Heirs, they're like a flying race. You've got the ghostly Narora, who worship the Source. You've got the peaceful Grove Tenders, who are like tree people. And you've got the giant Brawen, who are huge giants who live on this island in the sky. And everyone's shown up to fight for the source and control of the source. And so what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you what components come in this box, then I'm going to show you how to set up a game, and then I'm going to talk you through how to play the game. But if you really want to do well at the game, you'll have to understand all of these factions in detail. And I'm not going to go into each of the 4 asymmetrical factions in this video. I'm going to show you like a few specific rules, but every faction has a lot of talents, which are like keywords. They give them special abilities, and so you will want to have a look at those. Chip Theory Games did a bunch of good videos breaking down each and every faction, so I recommend those, but I will talk about the actual core rules of the game in a lot of detail in this video, and it's really going to help you when you get down to playing with it, because this is quite a complicated game. So the first thing we're going to do is open up the box and have a look at the components. There's your rulebook. This is version 1. Solo scenarios, cooperative scenarios. We've got a whole bunch of reference sheets for each faction. So these are sort of like the standard type of material you get with Chip Theory Games. It's plastic, but it's very, very thin. And this is a reference sheet for the Narora. These are all of their buildings that they can build within their fortress, and more on that later, but everyone has a home base that you can upgrade in different asymmetrical ways, and you're not going to be able to do all of these in a single game, so you're going to have to decide on a strategy that you want for the game. On the back, you've got some hints and tips up here. These are essential reading, and then down here you've got all the different talents you're going to find on the different units and heroes that the Narorans have. Grove Tenders are one of the other factions. This is a neutral faction sheet, and one for the Brawen and the heirs as well. We've got a big plastic container here, which contains a bunch of these isle tiles. And this isle tile is specific. You'll need this one in every game because it's got this road around the middle. All of the others have all kinds of different random setups, and you'll need all but one of these for every game, but this one you should put out specially because you'll always need this one. We've also got in here the fortresses, one for each faction. So there's the Grove Tender Fortress, the Narora Fortress, this is the Heirs Fortress, and this is the Brawen Fortress. We've got some dice. Each faction has a set of 3 dice associated with it. We've got the Naroran, the Brawen. Down here we've got the Grove Tenders, and the Heirs are in purple. Then we've got down here 6 attack dice, which are in white, and 1 d6 that's sky shaded. We've got these Earthscaping tiles here, which are like miniature versions of those land tiles we looked at earlier. And we've got 8 of those. We've got a little jug of blue crystal pegs. We have lots of chips. After all, it is Chip Theory Games. So we've got mercenary chips here, which are these black ones. We've got landmark chips here, which are the white ones. And this is a special one that I've set to one side because you only need it under certain circumstances, and you won't need it for every game. We've got some standard Chip Theory Games health chips here. Very tight. Then we've got faction chips and other setup chips. So every faction, here the Brawen, have a set of chips that comprise their units and defensive buildings and things like that you can build. Heroes as well. We've got 4 of these source counters. We've got 4 fortress health counters. And then we've got 1 chip for each faction with their faction character on it. And these are used for marking enemies during a 3 or 4 player game. And what you're going to do when you get these chips is you're going to put them up in these barracks trays. So there are 4 barracks trays, 1 for each faction, and you're going to put the chips out in here so that you can easily select them when the game is being played. And just to prove this to you, here are 2 sets of chips that I set up earlier. The Grove Tenders over here. I've put the 3 heroes up front, the units in the middle, and the Spires at the back. And I've done that for both factions. Here we've got a case of upgrade chips. We've got fortifications, range upgrades, and attack upgrades. And finally we've got this little box here, which contains 2 decks of cards. We've got relic cards, and we've got event cards. These are, again, the same plastic sort of cards that Chip Theory games like so much, so completely waterproof. So now that we've had a look at everything in the box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through how to set up a game of Cloudspire. So, I'm going to teach you guys how to set up a 2 to 4 player competitive game, which means I'm not going to be showing you the cooperative scenarios or the solo scenarios. So the first thing everybody has to do, well, the first thing you can do is pick a first player, and the game doesn't give any guides on this, so you can use any means that you want to pick the first player. There's no first player token or anything like that either, so you're just going to have to decide amongst yourselves. Once someone's picked the first player, then you decide how to divvy up the factions. You can let the first player choose first, or you can let the last player or the other player choose first. How you decide who's going to play which faction is entirely up to you as well. So once each player has decided what faction they're going to be, they need to receive some stuff. First, they're going to need to receive their specific player sheet. So during this video, I'm basically going to be demonstrating everything with the Grove Tenders and the Heirs, but I will, just during this setup, show you the differences between setting up a 2, 3, and 4 player game. After that, there's very few differences between the games with different player counts. In fact, there's really only one distinct difference you need to note, and after that, the games play exactly the same way. So, we'll set up a 2-player game, I'll mention the differences between setup for 2, 3, and 4, and then I will mention the differences when we get to the gameplay, but they're very minor actually. For this particular setup, I'm going to show you primarily the Grove Tenders and the Narora. So every player is going to need their specific reference card, they're going to need their specific fortress, they're going to need a barracks, they're going to need their 11 chips, they're going to need 3 dice that belong to their faction, and then they're all good to go. It should be noted that when you're setting up your barracks of units here, everything is double-sided, and the chips have a side that's like this, and a side with a star on it. And literally everything, even the Spires have a star side and a side without a star. So when you're setting up your barracks, make sure that you put all the chips facing you with the star at the back. So everything here has got their plain side facing forward. Interestingly, the Naroran minions don't have stars on them, nor do their Spires, but their heroes do. Anyway, we'll be learning about the stars and what they mean when we get to gameplay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the Isle of Ankar. So we're going to take this round isle tile with the road all the way around it, and we're going to put that in the middle of the board. Then we're going to take the other isle tiles and we're going to randomize them and randomly place them around the central tile. The last one is a leftover for replayability purposes, so you can put it back in the box. Now, whoever is the first player is going to pick up one of the 6 tiles that they choose. So when you flip over a tile, what you're going to be looking at primarily are the source wells to see where they are and how they work for you, because they're very important, but you'll figure that out later. What we're looking at for the rules in this section of the game is this path here, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be attaching our fortress to this tile. And we want to be thinking about how this path is going to work for us. When we put the fortress out, there are a few rules. The fortress has to have its gate, which is this front part here, touching 3 other hexes. So none of this. Furthermore, It can't overlap any other tiles, so none of this. However, it can touch them, so if we wanted to go into here, that would be okay. But the final rule is that it must have one path hex in front of it, so this is not a legal placement. So with this in mind, this is a legal placement because we have 3 hexes touching the gate, we're not overlapping any other mats, and we have a path that is touching our gate that goes and connects this tile to the central path in the middle of the board. So if we're setting up a 2-player game just against the Neuroran player can choose any one of these other 5 tiles to flip over and perform the same process. In a 3-player game, the next player to set up would pick from the next 3 tiles around the board, one of them to flip and attach their fort to. And then the final player in the 3rd-player game would do the same. So if our Neuroran player were to set up here, our Brawin player would go here, here, or here. If the Neuroran player were to take this one, then the Brawin player would go here, here, or here. In a 4-player game, you have choice of the next 2 tiles. So the next player in player order would go here or here, the next player after that would go here or here, and the final player would go here or here. So our Neuroran player is going to flip over this tile here and set up their fort. Now that the Neuroran player has set up their fort, the game goes back to the Grove Tenders who can pick another tile to pick up an Orient. Then back to the Neuroran, and they'll take turns flipping over the remaining tiles and orienting them. And this works the same way in a 3 or 4-player game as well. So in a 3-player game, the other player would set up their fort here, here, or here, and then the first player to set up their fort would orient a tile, the second player would orient a tile, and then the 3rd player would do another one. And in a 4th-player game, only the first 2 to set up their forts would have 2 tiles left to orient. So I'll flip over the rest of these tiles now. Now it's important to remember when you're revealing the rest of these tiles that just like the fortress tiles, all of them must have a pathway that joins them up into this central path. And that's got to be that tile to the center, not via another tile. So now that we've done that, every player is going to get their tracker chips for their faction board to count their resources. So you track your health here and your source here. And you start with 0 source, so we're going to take this and we're going to put it next to the little source chip here to show that we have 0. Now every fortress starts with 10 health, so we're going to flip it over to the side that goes up to 10, put it down here to show with this heart that we have 10 health. Now in a 3 and 4-player game, you'll have to give each player their appropriate faction token to have. In a game with just 2 players, these tokens aren't needed. So now that we've done that, we're going to set up our landmark chips, which are the white chips. We're going to use all of these, except for the ancient tracks here. They may or may not appear in this game, so you can just set them to one side. You may or may not need them. The rest of these landmark chips here, what we're going to do is we're going to sort them into 2 decks. And one deck is going to have landmark chips with all of the backs, except for this one, and the other one is going to be all of these ones, which are called the swamp chips. Now that we've got our 2 stacks, we're going to take the swamp chips and we're going to shuffle them up. And we're going to go to each player's fortress gate, which is this section at the front of their fortress here. On every aisle tile, there are 2 source wells, which are marked by these shiny blue lights. What we're going to do is we're going to work out which one is closest to the fortress gate, and we're going to put a swamp landmark down on it. If 2 are equidistant, then the player who owns the fortress can choose which one they want the swamp tile to go down on. So you can see here and here. Now that we've put out our 2 starting swamp tiles for our 2 players, we're going to take the remaining swamp tiles and shuffle them back into this stack. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take landmark chips and just put them out on each remaining source well on the board. The remaining landmark chips you can put back in the box because you won't need them this game. So the next thing we're going to do is set up the marketplace, which is comprised of these black mercenary chips here. And it's also made up of these Earthscape tiles. So we're going to get those out as well. All we have to do when setting up the marketplace is to shuffle these mercenary tiles so that they're sufficiently randomized. And these Earthscapes as well, give those a shuffle. And then flip over the top Earthscape tile and reveal 1 mercenary chip per player plus 1. So in a 2-player game, we're going to reveal 3. In a 3-player game, we'd reveal 4, and in a 4-player game, we'd reveal 5. We're going to take our event deck here and give it a shuffle and put it somewhere close by. We'll do the same with the relic deck. And then all we have to do is get out the remaining pieces and put them somewhere close at hand. Put out the health chips, the upgrade tokens, the attack dice, the d6, and the blue source pegs somewhere close by where all the players can reach them. And now that we've done that, we've actually got Cloudspire all set up and ready to play. So without further ado, let's get into the gameplay explanation. So, in Cloudspire, of course, the objective is to win the war for this land of Ankara and to control the source on the island. So, each player is going to have a fortress, and these are our home bases, and we must protect our fortresses at all cost, because holding the fortress is the key to winning the war. We're going to be using our fortresses to construct heroes, minions, and spires. And the spires are going to protect our fortress. They're like defensive towers. And the minions are going to march out across the land with the heroes in support and do battle. And hopefully the winning army will march on the opponent's fortress, make it past the spires, and do some damage to it. Because at the end of the game, whoever has the most hit points left on their fortress and who's ever done the most upgrades to their fortress is going to be the winner. Upgrading your fortress allows you to explore different strategic paths and develop in different ways. But unless you're playing Endless Mode, which is a game variant in the rules, then you are going to probably not have enough source to explore all the different fortress advancements and all the different strategic options. If a fortress is defeated during the game, then it is possible to come back into the game. But if at any point you are the only one that has a fortress with hit points left, you are immediately the victor. In a 3 or 4 player game, one player would have to make sure that 2 or 3 fortresses were reduced to 0 hit points during the same wave. But if you reach the end of the game and all players are still in it, then you work out who's the winner by totaling your fortress advancements and your health on your fortress. So the game takes place over a number of waves, and you can reduce or increase this number if you want a shorter or longer game. But the standard game is 4 waves. Each wave is broken down into 6 phases. There is an event phase, then an income phase, followed by a market phase, a build phase, a prep phase, and an onslaught phase. I'm going to go into detail into all of these phases in this video, but I'll go into detail on how all of these phases work in this video, probably in that order. The Onslaught phase is the longest phase, and that's where all of the battling takes place. Most of the other phases are simply preparing to be successful in the Onslaught phase. And if you are knocked out of the game in the Onslaught phase, that is, your fortress is reduced to 0 health, but the game continues, then you would come back in the income phase of the following wave. The event phase itself is mostly just to tidy up after the Onslaught phase, and it reveals a new event card that's going to affect the game that round. After that, there's an income phase where you're going to receive source for the round, and that's when any players who are eliminated come back. After the income phase, there's a market phase where you'll buy these chips and things here. And after the market phase, that's when we do build phase, where we can build new spires, we can upgrade our fortress, we can upgrade our spires, we can put out these earthscapes, and all kinds of good stuff. After the build phase, there's a prep phase where what we're going to do is we're going to spend a resource called command points on buying minions that are then going to be our army in the Onslaught phase. And in the Onslaught phase, we're going to deploy those minions onto the board. They're going to march out across the board towards one another and do battle. So the very first thing we're going to look at is the event phase. So the event phase. In wave 1, skip it. Just don't do anything. Skip right over it. Don't even draw an event card. Just skip it, go straight to income. In wave 2, 3, and 4, you'll start by discarding the event card from the previous round, and if you've got any limited build action pegs in your fortress board, then you'll remove them. Every fortress has 2 little spots down here used for marking limited build actions. This will all make sense later on. You might have pegs in here from the start of wave 2 onwards, so remove them now. After that, draw an event card. The event card can come into effect in any phase in the game, and it will tell you how to resolve it on the card. And then you can move on to the income phase. In the income phase, each player around the table is going to gain source. Source is tracked here on our source dial. The amount of source we gain in the income step can be modified by upgrading our fortress. But if we haven't done any upgrades yet, i.e. it's wave 1, then we'll just gain the standard income that everyone receives. In wave 1, it's 5 source. In wave 2, it's 7. In wave 3, it's 9. In wave 4, it's 11 source. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go down here and ratchet our source dial up to 5 because it's wave 1. In a subsequent wave, you might start with some source going into the income phase. Let's say it's wave 4 and we've got 10 source already. The 11 source we receive in wave 4 would put us up to 21, but the dial doesn't go that high, so the excess is lost. It is possible to upgrade your fortress so you can go up to 21 source by flipping over the dial and gaining the additional numbers. But without the relevant upgrades, you're not allowed to do that. So in wave 1, we set ourselves to 5 source. Now, if we are alive and well in the game, that is the end of our income step. However, if we've been defeated in a previous round and our fortress has been reduced to 0 hit points, then this is the point in the game where we must come back into it. Let's say it's wave 2 and we've just received 7 source and we've got a few upgrades in our fortress. So fortress advancements are marked with the blue pegs, but more on that when we get to the build phase. Don't worry about it for now. But we've got to go back up to 3 health. If you're ever eliminated from the game, you can only come back to 3 health. We've got 7 source because we had 0 and we've just gained 7 from the beginning of the income step. For each health we recover, we must give up an advancement from our fortress. So we're going to lose the 2 advancements we already had, and we're going to be set at 2 health. We must go up to 3, which means we recover the last health point by spending 2 source. So we go down to 5. And now we're back in the game and we can proceed with the rest of the turn. In later waves of the game, if you're knocked out and you're much more developed in your fortress, in order to restore your fortress health, you must start by paying the most advanced advancement. So you can see here we have 3 levels in the Hall of Shaping, which is our most advanced track of all the tracks we have advanced. So we must lose level 3 of the Hall of Shaping first. Now we are drawn for most advanced with level 2 in the Hall of Shaping and level 2 in Inner Oak, so we can choose which of these 2 to remove next. If we remove Inner Oak, we'll then have to remove Hall of Shaping anyway to get back up to 3. So the income phase is actually very simple if you haven't been eliminated. And then we're going to go on to the market phase. So whoever is the first player will start the market phase. We're going to say it's the Grove Tenders. In the market phase, you can choose to buy something from the market, and then play will pass to the next player in turn order. They can make a purchase too. You can keep going around like this. If anyone passes, then they're out of the market phase for the round. There are mercenary chips and Earthscapes available in the market. On your turn in the market phase, you can buy one thing. You can buy a face-up chip, or you can buy the Earthscape. Earthscapes cost 2 source. Only 1 Earthscape can be purchased per market phase, which means that the first player to buy one will be the only player to get one. Keep the Earthscape next to your player board. You'll use it in the build phase, and you'll have to lose 2 source from your source dial. If you want to purchase a mercenary chip, then you'll have to pay the cost here in the blue circle. Some chips have 2 blue circles. The top one is the cost to purchase the chip. If someone does purchase a chip from the market, it is immediately replaced with a new one. There are 4 kinds of marketplace chips, which can be differentiated by their color. The blue chips are equipment that can only be found in this marketplace stack. The silver ones are Spires, which are different versions of the same spires you can build from your barracks. The bronze ones are minions and work the same way as your faction minions, and the gold ones are heroes, and we also have faction specific heroes, but these are all special mercenary versions of those things. The cost again here is on the convict. On the spire you can see the cost here. Some spires will have 2 blue circles. The top one with the yellow coin in it is the cost. If you purchase one of these chips, simply take the chip that you purchased and put it next to your barracks. The only limit to the number of chips you can buy in the market phase is the amount of source you have to spend. Any mercenary chips that you buy in the market phase that are kept next to your barracks can later be deployed at the appropriate time for free. What this means is that you don't have to pay for them again, seeing as you paid for them when you bought them from the market. So minions that you purchased from the market will be deployed in the prep phase. So spires that you purchase from the market can be built in the build phase, or they can be built with a special build action in the onslaught phase. Heroes and minions that you've purchased will be deployed in the prep phase, and any equipment that you've purchased, which are the blue chips, will be deployed with heroes in the prep phase. A hero can only hold one piece of equipment, and you must attach that equipment to them when deploying them, which is in the prep phase. We'll explain more about this later, but when you deploy a hero with a piece of equipment, you just put that equipment under their chip. They can only have one, and once it's there, it can never be removed. They'll carry this equipment for the rest of the game. Chips that are purchased in the market phase can be deployed during the current wave, so they can be used as soon as possible, with the exception of heroes that are purchased in Wave 1. In Wave 1, you can only deploy one hero, and it must be the zero-cost faction hero that comes with your faction. So you cannot deploy any mercenary heroes in Wave 1. And so that's it for the market phase. We're going to move on to the build phase. So the build phase works a lot like the market phase, with the first player beginning, and then everybody does one thing, and you continue around the table until everybody has passed. Once someone's passed, they're out of the round and can't take any further build actions. There are 4 actions you can do in the build phase. You can advance your fortress, you can construct a spire, you can upgrade a spire, or you can put out an Earthscape tile. So let's look at constructing a spire first. Each faction has 4 spires, so I recommend looking at your faction sheet, which will tell you which spires you can deploy and how to gain access to the rest, if you don't have access to them already. So here we've got the Grove Tender's barracks. And we can tell the spires in the barracks because they are silver. So we can see the color of the tile is generally silver. Now, here we've got the cost and source to build it, so we're going to have to pay 5 source if we want to construct this spire. The number below it is the reward. We don't need to worry about this until the onslaught phase, but if anyone destroys this spire, the player who destroyed it will gain this number of source as a reward. Here we've got the upgrades that the spire comes with, and down here we've got any pertinent talents, which are special abilities that the spire might have. These 3 blue dots over here are further upgrades that can be added to the spire. Seeing as it comes with 2, this means we can install 1 more upgrade. And up here, this is the name of the spire. This is called a retol. On the back, we've got Muskeg, which is kind of just like a more advanced version of retol. As you can see, it just gains this keyword wallop. However, because this is the gold star version, we cannot build these at the start, so we'll have to check the Grove Tender faction sheet to see what we need to do to gain access to these spires. But let's look at how we'd build a retol. In order to build a spire, you must build it on a source well. If you remember, during setup, the source well is where we put these landmark chips. There's one, and there's another one hiding under the water. In order to build a spire on these source wells, first we need to clear the landmarks, which we can only do in the onslaught phase, which means at this stage, we can't actually put out a spire on this tile. However, every faction has 2 source wells in their fortress, which means that we will be able to build a spire here or here. It should be noted that it is possible for enemy factions to gain access to these source wells and build on them, but only the owning faction can build in their own fortress. In order to build on a isle tile like this one, you must have influence over it. You have influence over a tile if it is adjacent to your fortress or adjacent to a tile on which you have a spire. So at the moment, the Grove Tenders only have influence over this tile directly in front of them. However, if they were to clear one of these landmarks and build a spire here, then they would have access to any of the tiles. You can see here the different tiles, any of these tiles adjacent to this one they've built a spire on. So, if we're going to build the retol, the first thing we have to do is pay 5 source. If we'd purchased a mercenary spire in the market phase, we could put it out and build it for free because we've already paid the source cost. When you build a spire, you take the appropriate chips. There are 3 kinds of chips relevant to spires: fortification chips, range upgrades, and attack upgrades. We'll look at these in more detail when we get to the Onslaught phase and we look at the Spire's attack stage of a player's turn. For now though, let's just understand that when we build a Spire we have to choose the order in which the chips are stacked. The Retall has an attack and a range upgrade, so it doesn't actually have a fortification. We'll look at that in a minute, but we must decide the order in which these chips are stacked. The range chip improves the range of the Spire, but the attack chip gives it an attack. Without an attack chip, a Spire has no attack at all, but they always have a minimum range of 1. Chips also represent the Spire's health, and we're going to stack them underneath it like this. We can choose the order of the chips, but when a Spire takes damage, you always remove the bottom chip first. This means that if we put the attack chip on the bottom and it gets attacked, it will lose the attack chip and it won't be able to attack at all. If it loses its second chip, it will be destroyed and removed from the game. The player who destroyed it will gain the source reward here. So in this instance, we probably want to put the attack chip on top of the ranged chip. The fortification chips are harder to kill than other chips, so if you do have one, you always want to put it on the bottom. We'll talk more about attacking Spires in the Onslaught phase. Once you've put out the appropriate chips and chosen the order, simply place it on the source well that you want to build it upon. There's a limit to the number of Spires you can have at any given time. In a 2-player game, you can only have 6 Spires at a time. In a 3-player game, you can have 5 Spires at a time, and in a 4-player game, you can have 4 Spires at a time. Of course, if they're destroyed, you're welcome to replace them. So let's look at our second build option in the build phase, upgrading a Spire. So if you remember, we talked about these 3 little blue dots here. These are the number of chips total that can be stacked under the Retall. Different Spires have different levels of upgrade. Some Spires, for example this Slingshot, actually start with chips underneath them, but don't have any upgrade slots at all. This means you can never upgrade it, and even if it's damaged, you cannot replace the chips. Other Spires, like this Auroran Refractor, could have additional chips added, but only if the ones it starts with are destroyed. Remember, if it loses all its chips, it's destroyed and returned to the owner's barracks. But here our Retall can have 1 more chip, so we can do an upgrade Spire action. When you do an upgrade Spire action, you can actually build as many chips underneath the Spire as you want, but you are restricted by the number it can have here, and also the number of chips you can pay for. What this means is that if our Retall had already lost a chip due to taking damage, we can now add 2 chips to it, so long as we had the source to do so. When upgrading a Spire, you choose from the available Spire upgrades, which is the 3 chips we looked at earlier, and decide which upgrade you'd like to purchase. If you buy an additional attack or an additional range, then you must pay a price equal to the number of chips under the Spire plus 1 for the chip being added. So that would have a cost of 3 to add that. Now our Retall is at maximum capacity and we can't add any more chips. But if we were allowed to add a 4th chip, it would cost us 4 source, for a total of 7 source to add both of those chips. Unlike these aggressive upgrades, the defensive upgrade fortification always costs 2 source, no matter how many chips there are. Now it should be noted that whenever you add an upgrade chip to a Spire, it is added to the bottom of the Spire, which is good in this case for the fortification, but not so good if we purchase an expensive additional attack, because that's the first thing we're going to lose when we're hit. As always, any source you spent is tracked here with your source dial. The third build option you have in the build phase is place an Earthscape. So we've got our Earthscape tile from earlier, and only players that bought an Earthscape from the market can do this. If you did just buy the Earthscape, you don't have to place it now. You can wait to place it in a later wave. But if you want to place it now, you can place this Earthscape either on the board or adjacent to the board. However, it must be completely level, so you can't place it partially on the board. Additionally, at least one of the 3 hexes on the Earthscape must cover a hex that you have influence over. In this example, we have influence over these 2 hexes here, so we can put the Earthscape down here. However, the source well is on a tile that we do not have influence over yet. If we put the Earthscape off the board, at least one of the 3 hexes must be adjacent to a hex that we have influence over. In a situation where an Earthscape has been played out to increase the size of the board, if you are placing a second Earthscape, you cannot put it over an empty hole. We can cover up paths if we want, but we must make sure there is a legal path that goes straight from the fortress to the central tile. If the source wells have been cleared, we are free to cover up empty source wells if we want. If you build it in such a way that you've constructed a new source well on an island that you have influence over, you may immediately construct a spire on that source well. But the source well must be over an area that you have influence on. So in this example, I cannot build because this is not a space I have influence over. I only have influence over this island and not this one. When checking for influence, you always look at the isle tiles underneath the Earthscape. You cannot build an Earthscape over a space that has something on it. The fourth and final build option in the build phase is advance your fortress. So this means buying upgrades to your fortress and slotting these blue pegs to show you have them. So if we take a look at the Grove Tenders sheet here, we can see that there are a number of fortress advancements that we can take, and they're all categorized with different names here. Some of these have 2 levels of advancement, while others have 3, and some of them will make use of these unique faction dice that we took earlier. Each building will tell you how their unique die is used, when to roll it, and what to do with it. If you want to purchase a level in a building on your faction sheet, you must purchase the levels in order, starting with 1 and progressing to 2 and then finally 3. You must pay the cost next to the level in order to achieve it. So to buy a level 3 Inner Oak, we need to pay 9 source in total. When you purchase level 1 Inner Oak, you simply take a blue peg and add it to that space on your player board. When you achieve level 3 Inner Oak, it tells you that you've gained the Ratify die. That's this one here. This die is rolled in the Onslaught phase, so you can leave it here for now to show that you've got access to it, and when you get to the Onslaught phase, you roll it, and then you can use it for an effect on the die face. There are a lot of different advancements for each faction, and I don't have time to look at them all in detail in this video, but each one represents a unique strategic avenue, and you won't have the source to purchase them all in any given game. So you have to think hard about which upgrades you want to pursue, and how that's going to inform the strategy you're going to use in the Onslaught phase. But that brings us to the end of the build phase, and now we're into the prep phase. So the prep phase is essentially preparation for the Onslaught phase. We're going to recruit an army of heroes and minions and prepare them to do battle with the enemy fortress. In this phase, if there are 3 or 4 players, you're also going to use those faction tokens to determine who your mark's going to be. You don't have to do this in a 2-player game because each player will automatically target one another. So let's add in another fortress, for example. So as you can see for this example, we've added the Brawin fortress up here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the 3 faction tokens and assign them to the players we want to attack. So starting with the first player, which is our Grove Tenders, the Grove Tenders have decided that they're going to target the Narora because they're the closest enemies to the Grove Tenders, simply numerically in terms of spaces. So the Grove Tenders take their token here and put it down next to the Narora fortress to show those are their enemies. Then the Narorans, as the next in player order, take their token and they retaliate against the Grove Tenders. Now the Brawin think, if the Narora army is going to be marching out towards the Grove Tenders, this is a great opportunity for me to get in there and destroy their fortress, so I will also target them. Now we can see here the 2 mark tokens on the Narora and the 1 mark token on the Grove Tenders, which means that no minions will be marching towards the Brawin fortress unless the Narora fortress falls. If that happens, then any marks there will automatically default to other valid targets. The Grove Tenders would go over to the Brawin, and the Brawin would go to the Grove Tenders. If the Naroran fortress falls in a 4-player game, then any faction who had marked it can choose one of the other 2 factions, provided they're both still alive, to mark as their new target. But back in our 2-player setup, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be making a deployment stack, which is essentially our army that's going to attack. The deployment stack can contain our heroes, our minions, and any heroes and minions that we purchased from the market. Except as discussed in Wave 1, there's only one hero that you can deploy, your 0 cost faction hero. And when I say cost, I'm talking about command points. In the prep phase, you will be given a certain number of command points which you're going to spend on these forces. Each one has a specific command point or CP cost. This is separate from source, and there's no actual physical marker to track it because it doesn't persist. Source will only be lost if you spend it or someone takes it away from you. But CPs can only be spent on forces in the prep phase, and if you don't spend them all, then you lose them. But you'll get some more next phase. So now we turn our eyes back to the Grove Tender Barracks. We can see the 3 different kinds of chips here. Just like the mercenaries we looked at in the market phase, the gold chips are the heroes, and this is Daiwen, the 0 cost hero for the Grove Tenders. We've got these bronze chips, which are the minions for the Grove Tenders, and of course at the back the silver chips, which are the Spires. We can't do anything with them in the prep phase, so we're only looking at these 9 up front. You can see the CP cost here on the chips. So Daiwen costs 0, Yabanthe, the next hero, costs 4, and Waivanke costs 7. You can see here a Vine Herald unit that costs 3, and a Taproot here, which also costs 3. The more powerful unit, the Grizzly Oak, that costs 6. The units you have access to purchase at this moment will be determined by your asymmetrical faction powers. For example, the Grove Tenders can purchase any of these 6 units at this time, but other factions may have greater or fewer options. But other factions may have more or less options, so make sure you read your faction sheet carefully. In the Wave 1 prep phase, we have 5 CPs to spend, just the same as the source we got in the income phase. And just like the source, it goes up over waves in exactly the same quantities. So in Wave 2, we'll have 7, in Wave 3, we'll have 9, and in Wave 4, we'll have 11 CP to spend. So if we've got 5, we could, for example, have a Taproot and a Warbriar. Because this is Wave 1, we're also going to deploy our 0 cost hero. The number of minions that you want to deploy in this phase is only limited by the CP that you have available to you. Heroes, on the other hand, are slightly different. You can only ever have 2 heroes deployed on the board at any given time, and sometimes you will already have heroes on the board. In Wave 1, we have to deploy 1 hero, but at the end of Wave 1, that hero might still be on the board, and I'll explain that later, which means that in Wave 2, we can only deploy 1 additional hero. Because there's quite a high CP cost, we might not even want to deploy a hero. But you can only ever have 2, so if we had a second hero deployed in Wave 2, we couldn't deploy a third hero, whether they're one of our faction heroes or a mercenary hero. We couldn't put one out until we returned one of these to the barracks or they died. Let's say, for the purposes of this example, that we decide to deploy a Taproot and a Warbriar. We're also going to put out Daiwen because it's the first wave. We're going to take the pertinent number of health and put them under each chip. We've got a lot of statistics here on the different chips, and I'll talk about these when we get to the Onslaught phase in just a minute. You'll need to know all of this stuff in order to make a sensible choice here in the prep step, and once you've watched this video, you should be able to make those sensible choices. For now, all we really need to look at are these health values here, the top red statistic, and we get chips equal to the red health values of the units, and put them underneath like that to represent the unit's health. Now we create a stack of chips, just like this. I've put Daiwen on top, but Daiwen can go on top or the bottom. However, because he's a hero, he cannot go in the middle. That's a no-no. Heroes must be on top of the entire stack or below the entire stack. So we'll put Daiwen on the bottom for now. Now here's our deployment stack, and we can lock that in and get ready for the Onslaught phase. But the Grove Tenders, because they're the first player, have to lock in first. The Narora can wait until the Grove Tenders have locked in and then ask them what they are deploying. And they would say Warbriar, Taproot, and Daiwen. In the first wave of the game, because you can see the Warbriar on top, that pretty much telegraphs exactly how we've organized our stack. But in later waves, when there are many more minions, you may not know the order of the minions. You can only ask what's in the stack. Minions can also be deployed in what's called a group. And if minions are grouped, then they will be grouped until one is dead. So in this case, what we've done is we've created 2 active units. So they will move separately and operate separately. But if we want to group them, we simply put one chip on top of the other and don't put out hit points for one of those chips. And when you create a group, you must organize the chips in descending order of the movement value. So the movement value is this green one here, and that means the slowest one must be on top of the group. If the units in the group have the same movement value, then you can choose which one goes on top. Now the Warbriar and the Taproot are grouped. This means that only the chip on top can be attacked and damaged. So in this case, only the Warbriar can be attacked and damaged, and until it's killed, the Taproot is essentially inactive. Once all 3 hit points have been removed from the Warbriar is killed, and then the Taproot is left active. Heroes can never be added to a group. Heroes always operate independently. Grouping units together like this allows you to get more vulnerable units or units with strategic advantages further into the game before they become vulnerable and targetable. However, it also means that they can't attack or use any of their talents until the minion on top is killed. When you're creating your deployment stack, provided you've got the CP for all of the units involved, you can actually deploy a group of units as well as single active units, creating a mixture of active units and groups within the deployment stack. Heroes must still go on the top or bottom of the whole thing. Whenever you're ready and you're locked in, put the units on the fortress gate. So with both units' deployment stacks locked in, the prep phase is complete, and it's time for the Onslaught phase. It's time to do battle. It's the Onslaught phase. It's time for battle. It's time to kill each other. We've created these stacks which contain heroes and minions. This phase will go on in a series of rounds made up of player turns until all the minions are dead. This means that we could wind up in a situation where the heroes are out on the board and all the minions have killed each other and the round ends, even though we've both got heroes left on the board. That's fine. All the minions are dead, and that signals the end of this phase. So the phase is organized into player turns, which are made up of a series of stages. Once every player has had a turn, that signifies a round. We'll go round and round and round in this phase until all the minions are dead. A player's turn is made up of 5 stages. Start of the turn stage, movement stage, Spires attack stage, exploration stage, and attack stage. So we're going to go through these in order to look at how they function. But before we do that, let's just go over all the details on the minion and hero chips. So here we've got some examples of some heroes and a minion that belong to the Narora and one for the Grove Tenders. The Grove Tenders hero. What we've got here are 3 statistics on the left and some values here on the right as well. Now the 3 statistics on the left are health, attack, and movement. And you've got the CP cost we looked at in the prep phase, as well as the reward if this unit is killed. So if the Naroran were to kill Daiwyn, they would gain 2 source, and they'd immediately put that onto their source counter. And Vasi's a bit better, he's worth 4. You'll notice I've also got him on his promoted side, and I'll talk about promotion later, but for now it's just for example. The heroes also have these special little movement hexes, and I'll talk about those when we get to movement, but it is possible for minions to have them as well. And Burnout down here is a regular minion. They have the 3 stats here, health, attack, and movement, as well as their CP cost and reward cost. And all 3 of them have talents listed here at the bottom as well. You'll notice that the heroes also have little upgrade counters just like the Spires, and we'll talk about that at the end of this section in a part called Leveling Up. You'll notice that the promoted version of Anvasi has this flying talent here. This is super important. Flying is a massively important part of the game, and I'll call it out over the course of this Onslaught phase explanation because it's such an important talent. Because the factions are asymmetrical, they have different numbers of flying units. I'm pretty sure Anvasi is the only flying unit in the Narora, and that the Grove Tenders don't have any at all. Let's start by going through a player's turn in order, and we'll start with start of the turn. So there are essentially 2 things that will happen during start of the turn. The first is that you'll trigger anything that has start of the turn as a trigger effect. Now this could be an event card, it could be a relic card, it could be talents or other things that happen at this stage. But once you've resolved all of those, then the second thing that happens in your start of the turn, and this is very important, is the limited build option. You can only use 1 limited build option during your start of your turn stage, and you can only use 2 of them for the entire Onslaught phase. So what this means is that when we use one limited build option, we're going to put a peg down here, and that's our one for this start of the turn. If we want to use another one in a later start of your turn stage, we'll put another peg out here, and now we can't use them again this Onslaught phase. We'll have to wait till the next Onslaught phase. And the limited build option is really important. With the limited build option, you can do two things. You can construct a spire or upgrade a spire, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is really important and could be very critical to surviving the Onslaught phase. As you've seen, we get rewards for destroying spires and killing units, so we will accrue source during the Onslaught phase. So this is a great way to spend some of it and make sure you don't lose it to pillaging. Constructing a spire with a limited build option or upgrading a spire, they both work in exactly the same way as they did in the build phase, which means that you must construct a spire on a source well, you must construct it on a tile that you have influence over or in your fortress. If you're building upgrades, you can build as many upgrade chips as you can afford and that the spire can hold. And so once you've decided whether you want to use a limited build option, you are done with your start of the turn stage. The next part of your turn is movement, and movement on your first turn in the Onslaught phase is a little different to movement in later turns because you have to deploy your units from their stack. When deploying the units from the stack, you must always deploy the top ones. Minions move their maximum distance towards their mark, so in this case the Warbriar is going to move 2 spaces towards the Nororan fortress. 1, 2. The Taproot will do the same. Heroes move differently. Heroes move as you choose to move them. We also note that Daiwen has this special movement symbol here. The minions don't have that, which means they can only move on path hexes like this one, or the ones they're stood on. They cannot move on the plains, they cannot move on the forest, they cannot move on the mountains, and they cannot move on the water. Because Daiwen has a forest here, that means he can move on plains and forest spaces. And I'll explain a bit more about this in just a second. But if we want him to move out, that means we can move him 1, 2 up to here, or we can move him 1 space over to here. He's then blocked by this minion and this landmark. We cannot choose to leave Daiwen here in the fortress gate if he could move out. If we'd put Daiwen on top and we decided to move him 2 forward, we would then move the Taproot 2 forward. Minions cannot be blocked by your own heroes, which means that Daiwen would be displaced into the Taproot's space. The Warbriar would then try to move out, displacing Daiwen back into the fortress gate, and because he's left and gone back in, Daiwen's actually removed from the board for the rest of this phase. He's not killed, but he must be deployed again in Wave 2. So that was stupid, don't do that. It is possible in a later round, where we've got this super expensive and slow grizzled oak, for them to move out 1 space, leaving the rest of the stack in the fortress gate unable to deploy. That's fine, it just means that they will deploy as best they can in our following turns. So in the Grove Tender turn 2, Grizzled Oak would advance 1, and then the Warbriars would come out. In turn 3, we'd get 1 more movement out of everybody. Daiwen would then be forced to deploy. He is not in trouble for not deploying earlier because he was on the bottom of the stack and couldn't get out, but now that he can, he must deploy. Now, here on the Nororan side, we've got something a bit different. Now, as you can see here, I've got Anvasi on his promoted side. That's not right. He should be on his normal side because this is Wave 1. But for the purposes of this example, I've got him on the side with flying. He can cross every land type he wants. That's why he's got this water hex here, to symbolize that he can cross water. And if you can cross water, you can also cross mountains, you can cross forests, plains, and paths. And Vasi has 3 movement as well. He can come out here and deploy like this. And he has to deploy because he's a hero and he's on top of the stack. We can move out here for 1, but we cannot cross occupied hexes. So even though we're flying, we've still got to go 1, 2 around these hexes. We could, of course, stop on the water if we wanted. Then we'll get the Burnout coming out, who's going to go 1, 2 towards the enemy. And finally, the Medium, who stops here for 1. Even though they've got a movement of 3, they cannot progress because the path is blocked by the Burnout. You can never move over spaces containing other chips. You can be blocked by enemy minions, enemy heroes, and your own minions and landmarks, but you cannot be blocked by your own heroes. As we saw earlier with the Daiwen example, if a minion wants to move through an allied hero, they simply displace that hero into the space that they were moving from. This does not count towards the hero's movement though, so the hero can still move their full value. Whenever you start moving your minions, you must start by moving the minion closest to the enemy fortress. This is called your lead minion. If two minions are equally distant from their mark, then you can choose which one to activate first. So now we're going to do turn 2 for the Grove Tenders. The Warbriar goes 1-2, the Trapper goes 1-2, and Daiwen goes 1-2. Now obviously I'm skipping over a lot of steps here just to illustrate the movement of the units. When you're moving your units, you can choose to move your heroes before or after moving all of your minions. So the minute you start resolving minion movement, you have to resolve movement for all of your minions before you can move any of your heroes. So the Nororan will decide to move Invasi first. He's going to go 1, 2, 3 up to here. When calculating the movement for the minions, they must move as much of their movement value as possible, and they must end their movement closer to their mark than when they started. However, this is very specific. They do not have to move via the most efficient path, they just have to make progress, which means they must end closer than they were when they started. So in this case, our burnout could go 1, 2. Now he's used his full movement and he's moved closer to the mark than he was when he started, even though he's less close than the optimum path would have taken him. The medium can go 1, 2, but then must move here for 3 because it's blocked by the minion here, and this path here would be a lateral movement because this is no closer to the mark than this one here. Eventually we're going to wind up in a position where the minions have continued to walk towards each other. So from here, our medium can move up to here, which is 6 hexes from the enemy base. They can move into here, which is 6 hexes from the enemy base, and they can move here, which is also 6 hexes from the enemy base. They've got 3 movement, so that would be 1, 2, or it would be 1, 2, 3. It's really up to it doesn't really matter. The point is that they've made progress towards the base because this is 6 hexes away, and that's 7, and they've used as much of their movement as they can, because now they're blocked by the enemy minion, and they will fight when we get to the attacking step. The burnout will then move 1 to here, and it can then occupy either of these 2 spaces as well, because they're equidistant from the enemy fortress, and so the Nororan player can decide which space they're going to occupy. Here we've got an example of a rather expensive heirs unit with flying. Flying, as you can see from this shape here, ignores all terrain types. So if you've gathered already from what I've spoken about when I've spoken about terrain, there is a hierarchy. Everything can cross paths. The next level up is plains, then it's forests. After that, it's mountains, and after that, water. Anything that can cross water, like these flying units here, can cross anything else. The only thing that prevents their movement is that you can't move through a space with chips in it. Daiwen has the forest symbol, which means that they can cross forests and also plains. And everything can move on paths, of course, but he can't cross mountains or water. But with the flying units, it's a little more complicated because we only have to wind up closer than when we started. So we could go 1, 2 to here, for example, if we wanted to really slow down. Again, we can go 1, 2 to here if we want to slow down. In this way, we've halved our movement, but we've still got to move so that we're always closer. So what we can't do is move laterally and then stop, or move backwards, because then we're further. So we'd still have to wind up doing this 1, 2. So from here we're 2 spaces away. So we could go 1, 2 like that if we wanted, and wait to attack from the front next turn. Or we could go 1, 2 and start attacking right away. So we'll get rid of the heirs for now because we're not playing with them in this game. Let's talk a little bit about heroes. Either before you start activating the minions, or after you've activated them all, you can move your heroes. You can move one hero before and one after if you happen to have two on the board as well. And heroes have their movement and their terrain abilities as well. So for example, we've got Flying and Vasi here who can move over all terrain. We've got Daiwin who can move through forests and plains as well as paths, of course. But they can move wherever they want. So if I were to activate Daiwin now, I could go 1, 2 up to here if that's what I wanted to do. I could go 1, 2 back down to here. If I were to activate Amvasa, he could go 1, 2, 3 over here if he wanted. So heroes can do pretty much whatever you decide you want to do with them. They can even go back into the Fortress Gate. And when they go back into the Fortress Gate, they come off of the board. And if they've lost any of their hit points, those hit points are replenished. They're then placed next to the barracks, and they can be deployed in a later Onslaught phase in a future wave. However, if they are to be redeployed, they would still count towards your 2-hero limit. So if you had 2 on the board already, you couldn't bring them back. But if you are to redeploy a hero that has already been on the board, it doesn't have a CP cost. So you only pay the CP cost once when you first deploy them. If your hero does retreat through the Fortress Gate and they have any upgrades, or if they've been promoted, they will keep any upgrades and promotions. They also keep any equipment attached and can't remove it. Once they have a piece of equipment, that's them for the whole game. So heroes don't have to use their full movement. They don't have to use any movement at all. They can stand still if they choose to do so. So obviously I've done several turns of movement here, but after you've done your movement, whether you're deploying or simply moving, the next stage of a player's turn is Spire's attack. Now in the Spire's attack stage, this is a little unusual. All opposing Spires will attack your units if they have a viable target. Spires never attack landmarks, they never attack other Spires, and they never attack fortress gates. Spires only attack opposing units, units being minions and heroes, and they only attack them if they belong to the active player. So if I'm the Grove Tenders and it's my turn, now all enemy Spires will attack my units. And the Spires will attack in turn order. So if we still had our Brawin player in the third player position, it would be the Neuroran Spires first, and then the Brawin. But in a 2-player game, it will just be the Neuroran Spires. Now they don't have any, so we'd skip over this phase on my turn until they built a Spire. But let's say for the purposes of example here, our Heir Royal Talon here is coming towards the Grove Tender Fortress. So for the purpose of this example, what we're going to do is pretend it's the Heir's player's turn. I'm also going to put in Darb here, one of the Heir's heroes. Because it's the Spire's attack stage of the Heir's turn, that means that all enemy Spires will attack their units. So the Heirs are the active player. So the Retol, which is the Spire belonging to the Grove Tenders, is going to attack. And Spires have a default range of 1, which means that they can attack within 1 hex. In this case here, and that's it. But we've got 1 range upgrade in our Spire here, which means that the range is increased to 2. So we can go 1, 2, and we can go 1, 2. So we're in range of both of these targets. When we have 2 viable targets, we can choose either one to attack. If this were a 3-player game, and our Neuroran also had a unit up here, we could not choose to attack the Burnout because it's not the Neuroran's turn. You only attack the active player. When the Spire doesn't attack, you count the number of attack upgrades under the Spire's chip. In this case, we've got 2. If we had 0, so if we're just sitting there like that, then we wouldn't be able to attack at all. But we have 2 chips, which means we get to roll 2 Spire attack dice. Whenever a Spire attacks, you roll a number of attack dice equal to the number of chips. And the attack dice are mostly 1s. They've got 4 1s, they've got a 2 critical side, and a critical miss side. So in this case we're attacking the Royal Talon, so we roll for damage. We've rolled 2 damage, which means the Royal Talon will lose 2 health chips. Of course, if it's ever reduced to 0 health chips, then it is removed back to the owner's barracks, and whoever killed it gets the reward, in this case 4 source. Now, another thing you should note about this example I've set up is that our Retol here has a special talent called Air Defense. Air Defense just means that this Spire can attack units with flying. And you'll notice that both these air units have flying as a talent. If the Spire did not have Air Defense, it could not attack these units. Now, we can still increase its range. If it was, say, a shrubbery, for example, The shrubbery doesn't have air defense. We can still give it range upgrades, and it can still attack units up to a certain distance away, but without air defense, it cannot attack units with the flying talent. So that's really important to be aware of. Each spire will only attack once. So now that the Retol has attacked the Royal Talon, we can't attack Darb with it because it gets one attack. So once we've resolved all spires, that's the end of the Spires attack phase. Once you've done the Spires attack stage, it's time for the exploration stage. And in the exploration stage, we can look at these landmark tiles on the board. Now, in order to do an explore, you must have a unit, which is a hero or minion, adjacent to the landmark tile. Then, if you do, you can look at them in any order. So in this case, the Grove Tenders only have sight over one landmark tile. And that's this one here. So when they perform an explore, they'll take the tile and they'll look at it in secret. Then they'll decide whether or not they want to reveal it. If they don't want to reveal it, they'll put it face down and nothing further will happen. If they do want to reveal it, they'll put it down face up. So in this example here, the Grove Tenders have discovered a gate port. Now, we'll check any of these talents on the neutral game sheet, which is this one here, and we'll check the landmarks talents. We'll then resolve anything that needs to be resolved. Riftwalk and Overload don't actually need to be resolved right now, so we'll just put it down face up and leave it there. It will have an ongoing effect in the game until it is resolved or gotten rid of in some manner. Many of these landmarks are creatures of some kind. You don't have to reveal them, but if you do, you put health points under them, and then you can fight them and defeat them for rewards. In the case of the Grail Vipers, they have 3 health. So we get 3 health points and put them under the Grail Vipers. We'll then look up whatever Relentless means, and we can resolve conflicts against the Vipers. Whoever defeats them will gain 1 relic card, which is what this reward symbol indicates. Defeat means landing the killer blow. Some landmarks have the Engage talent. If you reveal a creature with Engage, you must turn it over. You cannot put it back. So we're going to have to put out 4 hit points under our Traxxir Loner. So typically, landmark monsters will have health, attack, and movement. And in this case, you can see the Traxxir Loner's reward of 4 source. They don't, however, move or attack independently. What this means is that they'll just stay put until they're killed, and they'll only do damage when they retaliate. And I'll explain retaliate in the attack stage next, but it just means that if you want to kill them, you have to hit them first, and if this is the first attack they've suffered in the exploration stage, then they will attack you back. Now you'll notice the Grail Vipers don't have an attack stat. They have the talent Relentless, which means they roll a Spire attack die and just keep totaling the damage until they roll a crit or a miss. So in this case, they would have done 3 damage to the medium who attacked them. So in this case, they lose 1 for the attack from the medium, and the medium loses 3 because the snakes are relentless. There's lots of exciting landmark things for you to explore, and so you've just got to get out there and see what's going on. Remember, unless they have the Engage keyword, you don't have to reveal them, so it's important to think about whether or not it's worth it to you. Note the Traxxir Roughneck's reward is that you get to construct a spire for free. Of course, it still needs to be on a tile there where you have influence, and it needs to be on a source well. You just don't have to pay the source cost. So now you know how to explore. And we're going to move on to attacking, the last stage of a player's turn in the Onslaught phase. So it's the attack stage, and we're finally going to do some damage. In the attack stage, all of your units, which is heroes and minions, will attack 1 time unless they have a talent that increases this. Minions have to attack if they have a valid target, but heroes can choose not to attack if they don't want to. All units have a default range of 1 hex, but some units have a range talent that increases that. So here we can see Daiwin has 2 range, as does the Taproot 2 range. The Warbriar just has no range at all, so that counts as range 1, which is all of the hexes immediately adjacent to him. Now, the Taproot, from here, with 2 range, can target either the Burnout or the Medium, because we count 1, 2, or 1, 2. It should be noted that Anvasi here, our flying enemy hero, can only be attacked by things with range, so if he were to walk up here and start wailing on this Warbriar, the Warbriar couldn't attack him back. The The Taproot can, however, shoot him from here because the chip does not block the ranged attack. The only things that block ranged attacks are gaps in the playboard and fortresses. Daiwin has wandered over here, but because of this gap, even though it's 1-2, he cannot target the Royal Talon because of this void in space. So as we saw earlier from the brief example in the exploration phase, when you attack an enemy unit, you deal damage equal to your attack statistic and then remove their health chips equal to the damage they've taken. So the Taproot here has a damage of 1 and a range of 2. They can go 1, 2 and hit this medium. The medium will lose their last health chip, which means they are dead. They will be removed from the board, and the Grove Tender player will receive 2 source. The Warbriar will hit the Burnout because it's the only valid target left. The Warbriar deals 1 damage, so the Burnout loses 1 health chip. The Burnout is not dead, and therefore it can retaliate. The Medium could not retaliate because it was killed. A retaliate is just an attack back, so in this case the Burnout will deal 1 damage to the Warbriar. If Envasi moves in here to attack the Taproot can retaliate because it's got range. If Envasi moves in here to attack the Warbriar cannot retaliate against Envasi because he doesn't have range and Envasi is flying. Typically, when a minion is killed, it is returned to its owner's barracks. But when a hero dies, sadly that hero is dead forever and their chip is removed from the game. Because the Nerorans are weird ghosts, their chips don't actually go straight back to their barracks. Their faction has slightly different rules for this. A unit can only retaliate once, not each time it is attacked. So if it is attacked multiple times, it will retaliate against the first valid target that attacks it. So I've reset the board here for a minute, because I just want to illustrate how retaliation works. You will always retaliate against the first unit that attacks you, and you can only retaliate once per attack stage. What this means is if it was the Neroran turn and the Burnout and the Medium both attacked the Warbriar, he would only hit back against the first unit that attacked him. So if it was the Burnout, they would do 1 damage to each other, and then the Medium could attack, and there'd be no retaliation. If Envasi were to come in here and attack the Warbriar first, the Warbriar could retaliate against Envasi, but even though it doesn't have range and couldn't normally attack him, he's got to come down out of the sky to attack it, and it's assumed that it can retaliate. However, if the Taproot attacks Envasi, it cannot retaliate because it's out of range. So the range trumps the retaliation, although the flying does not. So remember, each unit gets 1 attack and 1 retaliation in the attack stage. Now let's talk about attacking a Spire. Now in this example here, we've got a Neroran Evangelist attacking the Grove Tender's Spire. He's got range 2, so he can hit it 1-2, and he does 2 damage. However, the Retal will only lose 1 chip off of the bottom. Remember, the chips are the Spire's hit points. And no matter how much damage a Spire takes, it will always only lose 1 chip worth of health. Fortification upgrades require 2 damage to be destroyed, so if you only do 1 damage, then you'll never get through it, and you have to send someone that does more damage. Fortunately for the Neroran, the Evangelist does 2 damage, so they'll fire this, they'll do 2 damage, we'll still just remove 1 chip, but it is the fortification chip. If they had sent the Arcbright instead, the Arcbright would be completely ineffective against the fortification. Spires never retaliate. Spires only attack in the Spire's attack stage. So, once the Evangelist has hit the Spire, the attack is resolved. Remember that chips are always removed from the bottom of the Spire, and if it loses all of its chips, it is destroyed. The person that destroyed it gains the reward for the Retal, that's 2 source, and then the Spire is returned to the owner's barracks. Units can also attack fortress gates. In this case, the Evangelist has wound up right in front of the Grove Tender Fortress Gate. Because they're at range 2, they are forced to attack it. So here you can see the Nerorans have lined up nicely for an attack on the Grove Tender Fortress Gate. In order to attack the Fortress Gate, you must be in one of the adjacent hexes or have the appropriate range. So in this case, the Burnout, who's got range 1, is in range to attack the gate. He will deal 1 damage to it, and so we'll take the health marker and move it down to 9. Then the gate will retaliate, doing 1 damage to the Burnout. The Evangelist will attack and do 2 damage with their range to attack 1-2, so we'll move the dial down to 7. and then the gate will retaliate, doing 1 damage to the Evangelist. The Fortress Gate can retaliate any number of times and has an unlimited range. However, the Grove Tender is currently in a bad position because the Fortress Gate does take damage equal to the attack stat of the unit attacking it. In this case, it's going to take 7 more damage and be destroyed before it can kill these 2 minions. This is very dangerous for the Grove Tender because they're probably going to be eliminated from the game and the Neurorians will win. If they somehow hung in there on 2 or 3 health on their fortress, then that's lucky, but because they haven't lost the game, but it's very difficult to regain hit points on your fortress. Some factions have advancements that may allow them to regain 2 or 3 health on the fortress over the course of the whole game. So healing the fortress back up is not really viable. Let's talk about leveling up heroes and promoting them. Remember all those gold stars? Well, first I'll talk about promoting minions. Every faction has a way to promote their minions, and it's completely unique to that faction, and it's all part of that faction's specific strategies. For example, the Grove Tenders promote their minions by summoning them once they're on the battlefield. And the Neurorians can't actually promote their minions at all. Instead, all their minions are double-sided, and they can choose which side they want to use. And the heirs have to do certain fortress advancements in order to promote their minions. So I'll let you discover all of those unique strategies and methods on your own. I'm going to talk about leveling up and promoting heroes. So we're back here, and our medium's just taken 3 damage off of the Grail Vipers. And it is the Grove Tender's turn. This leaves Daiwin open to shoot the medium and kill it. He does 1 damage with his range 2 attack, and the medium is returned to the Neuroran, although not to their barracks because they're Neurora, and the Grove Tenders gain 2 source. Also, Daiwin, who has landed a killing blow, gains 1 level. And this is where we reference the upgrades on the hero chips. So we can see that Daiwin can hold 1 upgrade. Heroes use the same upgrades as Spires, but they work quite differently. We can give Daiwin an attack upgrade, which will be put under his character chip, and now his attack stat goes up by 1, so he does 2 damage instead of 1 damage. We can give him a fortification chip, which goes under his character chip, and now he just has an extra hit point, so 3 instead of 2. And finally, we can give him a range upgrade. Note that we can only give him a range upgrade because he has a range talent. Anvasi could not take a range upgrade because Anvasi does not have the range talent. So if Daiwin has the range upgrade, their range increases to 3. If Daiwin lands another killing blow, then they will level up again. But they can't hold another upgrade. So they're at maximum upgrades, which means that instead of leveling up, they are promoted. The chip flips over, and any upgrades under the character are lost. If this increases the total health value of the character, so we can see here that Daiwin goes up from 2 to 3, then the difference is gained by the character, even if they're wounded. Daiwin has now gained a new talent. Additionally, they have another upgrade spot. Note that all leveling up and promotions are completely optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. You may have a character who's not promoted but has a number of upgrade chips that you like, and you don't want to promote them and lose them. You may not prefer the promoted side. Anvasi actually has this ability called Matter Distortion, which actually causes them to become promoted. So that's really interesting and different to the way typical promotion works. So make sure you read your faction sheets carefully to discover all of your unique talents. So the last thing to discuss is Campfire mode. After all of the attacking has taken place, then it's time for the next player's turn in turn order, and we keep going back and forth until all minions are dead. But it is entirely possible for a situation to occur where only one faction's units remain. Let's say, for example, that Burnout and Anvasi have been killed. Only the Grove Tender's units remain. This means that they go into Campfire mode. When they're in Campfire mode, essentially their hero becomes completely inactive. They won't move, they can't attack, they can't be targeted or attacked either. They'll just stop and wait there. Then we'll just resolve the Grove Tender minions. Of course, Our Neuroran will still have turns and can still use their limited build options if they haven't done so already to build spires to try and, or upgrade spires to try and stop these minions from getting to their fortress. But we'll keep going until either the Neuroran fortress is destroyed or the minions are completely killed. The Neuroran will gain the source rewards and then the Onslaught phase will end. At the beginning of the Wave 2 Onslaught phase, Daiwon will reactivate in this position and can move and interact with the game as normal. This is why you might have one hero on the board when you are deploying for your wave, and that means that in the Grove Tenders Wave 2 Onslaught phase, they can only deploy one hero because they've already got one on the table, and 2 is the maximum number of heroes. It's also possible for a situation to arise where Mvasi is still alive, as is Daiwen, but all the minions are dead, in which case both of these heroes go into Campfire mode and the Onslaught phase is over. Once the Onslaught phase is over, then that's the wave over, and it's time to start Wave 2 with the event phase. So you've just got to the end of Wave 4. Don't start a new wave, the game is over, unless you want to play another wave. You know, you can play fewer or more waves, you can make the game as long or short as you want, it says so in the rulebook, but 4 is the standard number. So if you're playing the standard number, you've got to the end of 4, the game is over, time to determine who's won, okay? So remember, if at any point all fortresses were reduced to 0 health except for 1, that player was the winner in that moment and the game ended then. But if everyone has survived to the end, because there was no point where all fortresses were destroyed bar 1, or you were playing a 2-player game and no fortresses were destroyed, then it's time to work out your scores. Your scores are simply all of your advancements plus your remaining health. So if we've got 9 advancements in the fortress plus 8 health left at the end, then we've scored a total of 17 points. In the event of a tie, the first tiebreaker is remaining source. Whoever has the most source will then be declared the winner. If source is a tie, then whoever has the most spires on the board is declared the winner. And if you're tied for spires as well, then it's a tie. And that's pretty much all the fundamentals you need to know to execute Cloudspire, but you'll find that there's a whole lot more going on in these faction sheets. You know, just discovering the different strategies in the fortress advancements, discovering the different talents that each unit have. Each minion unit sort of has all these different talents that all work differently and all bring unique and different game elements to the table. So really familiarizing yourself with the asymmetry is going to be really important to doing well. And a lot of these keywords have interaction with other keywords and things like that. I've explained flying because that's quite common, but a lot of the units have unique talents that you need to look at your faction sheet to understand. There is just one more thing I'm going to talk about before I go, and that's a element that's unique to the heirs called Elfinkaze, who use about 4 keywords in order to function in the game, and it's a lot simpler than it seems if you're trying to learn it from the talents on the faction boards. So if you're not playing with the heirs, then you're done. And you know how to play Cloudspire, except you don't. But you know how to execute Cloudspire, and you can go away and learn how to do that by discovering these asymmetrical factions with your friends who want to learn with you. And if you want to get some more Cloudspire under your belt, Ollie and I will be back tomorrow. We're going to do Neurora versus Grove Tenders. But I will be back in just a minute to show you how the Elfinkaze work, in case your friends want to play as the heirs. So thank you for watching this video, and if you have found it at all useful or instructional, tell a friend, like the video, subscribe to the channel. And thanks so much for watching. But now, Elfinkaze Bonus Bit. So, what are Elfinkaze? Elfinkaze are a tiny bird minion unit that belongs to the heirs, who are the avian race, who want to rule over Ankara. The thing is, they don't really function like regular minions. For example, if they're still alive at the end of the Onslaught phase, but all of the other minions are dead, the game ends. Also, they can't kind of like move around and function like normal minions. Allow me to explain. Some heirs units will have this special talent called Elfin, and this goes kind of hand in hand with this ability called Roost. So you can see here we've got a Humminger who has 2 Roost and 1 Elfin, and a Regal Lookout, which is a special Spire that has 3 Roost and 1 Elfin. At the beginning of the Onslaught phase, before anyone has had a turn, regardless of who the first player is, the heirs player may put Elfinkaze on top of anything with the Elfin talent. So these are the Elfinkaze here, and they're a bit special. As you can see, they have 3 talents. They're flying, which functionally works the same as the flying talent for everything else. They have Roost Roam, which is a talent that allows them to spawn and move around in the special way I'm about to show you. They also each have a different talent. This one's got Glide Bomb, and this one's called Save. They're reversible, so Glide Bomb is on the other side of the one with Save. And you'll see that neither have a star, so there's no such thing as promoting an Elfinkaze. They're basically one-trick ponies. You can see they also don't have a movement statistic, although they do have an attack statistic, which means they can attack normally, although this is generally a bad idea because they only have 1 hit point. Typically, you're using them for their Glide Bomb or Save talent. At the beginning of the Onslaught phase, you take one Elfinkaze, you give it its little health chip there, and you put it down on something with Elfin. So in this case, we're going to put it down on the Regal Lookout Spire. And this is not the same as grouping. These units are both considered active and they're both considered targetable, but they will move together. So when the Humminger deploys from the fortress gate here, the Elfinkaze will move with it. So you can see the Humminger's movement is 2. So he's moved 2 out of the fortress gate. Elfinkaze don't have their own movement stat, but an Elfinkaze on a Spire can be activated at any time, and an Elfinkaze on another unit can be activated before or after that unit moves. So after the Humminger is deployed, the Elfinkaze can move off of him. Now he's got 2 Roost as his talent, which means the Elfinkaze's movement becomes 2. The Elfinkaze here is on the Regal Lookout, which has a 3 Roost talent, so this Elfinkaze has a movement of 3. So this Elfinkaze could move 2 steps, and because it's flying, it can move anywhere it wants. This one can move 3. 1, 2, 3. And now we should pay attention to the Save and Glide Bomb special abilities. Glide Bomb means that before or after moving, the Elfinkaze can remove itself from the table in order to do 2 damage to every Spire and unit adjacent to it. In this case, it will hit Daiwin and the Grail Vipers for 2 damage. And of course that means the heirs are going to get the relic reward for taking out the Grail Vipers. And Daiwin is going to be sad with 1 hit point left. The Elfinkaze is then removed from the table. Now it should be noted that if the Glide Bomber went off next to a Spire, they would deal 2 damage to that Spire, which means they'll remove 1 upgrade chip, whether it be a fortification, range, or attack upgrade. At the beginning of the heir's next turn, this Elfinkaze, who is on his own, will have to either immediately use his save ability, or use his movement to return to something with Roost, which is this Humminger here, or this Regal Lookout here. Now this Elfinkaze has a movement of 2 currently, because he's come from the Humminger, so he's going to have to use 2 to move back on top of the Humminger, because he cannot reach the Regal Lookout. His save ability means that he can remove himself from the board to heal up to 4 health to 1 adjacent friendly unit. So, if the Humminger had taken some damage for whatever reason, we could remove this Elfinkaze from the board before or after movement, or at the beginning of a turn where it was on its own, in order to heal the Humminger back up to full health. You can't go over your maximum health stat. This, of course, creates all these complex tactical interactions, as the Humminger might move along the road here, and then the Elfinkaze decides to fly back to the Regal Lookout. He's got 2 movements, so he'd have to stop here, but then he could get on top of it next turn, and he could roost there, and then when he leaves that, he'll have 3 movement. Of course, you must decide at the beginning of the Onslaught phase whether you want to put out the Elfinkaze on the Save or Glide Bomb side. Now you can have a mixture, any number of Elfinkaze on either side, but you must lock it in at the beginning of the Onslaught phase. What this means is that if we decide to use our limited build action during the Onslaught phase to put out a Regal Lookout here, it doesn't get an Elfinkaze on it because we've already missed the window to put one out, which is the beginning of the Onslaught phase before anyone takes a turn. Remember, your Elfinkaze also only have 1 hit point, and they can always be targeted because they're always active. And so that means that they are quite good at giving away source to your opponent, so make sure you use them carefully. The last thing to remember is, of course, to use them because they cannot prolong the game. Because they are not proper minions, if all of your other minions are killed, then that will end the Onslaught phase, and if you didn't use the Elfinkaze, then you've missed your opportunity. And so that's it for Cloudspire. I hope this has been helpful, and as I mentioned earlier, I'll be back tomorrow to play with Ollie, so I hope you'll come back and join us for that, and check out our final thoughts at the end of the series. And I'm just sorry that this video took so long to put together, and there was a bit of a delay on its release. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.